Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Rays Rewind with El Bushman and Drew.
Jansen. That is into center field. Here comes Kiermaier. Phillips has tied the game. Arose Arena coming around. Throw home. Now he stumbles. But the ball gets away. Tampa Bay wins it. Brett Phillips, Game 4 hero.
The sickest Tampa Bay Rays podcast. It's gonna be sick.
And welcome everybody back into a new episode of the Rays Rewind podcast, the sickest Tampa Bay Rays podcast on the Sick Podcast Network. I'm the great El Bushman, and joining me as usual is my co-host Drew. Make sure to go to our YouTube page at the Sick Podcast Rays Rewind and hit the subscribe and notification bell when new episodes drop. And also go to our Instagram page because sometimes we post videos and pictures and stuff. And that's at the Sick Podcast Rays Rewind podcast too. So thanks. Joining us today, we've got a great guest. Joining us on Rays Rewind today is a man that has his ears to the ground of the Rays, from trade rumors and roster moves to clubhouse insights and everything happening around the season. He has his finger on the pulse of the organization every single day. We're excited to have him on the show. Please welcome to the show from MLB.com, senior reporter Adam Berry. What's up, man?
Thank you for having me. This is some production value here, by the way. Goodness, just witnessing the opening there and being brought in like this is like a well.
We try to make it as professional as we can, even though sometimes we don't. But we'd like to keep it professional, especially when we have a guest on. So.
We had a real full circle moment when Brett Phillips was on because he thought we put that together just for him, which we had to tell him like, no, it's been the intro for at least 2 years. So
yeah,
it was.
You should have just told him, yes, Brett. For every guest, break out the stops. It's a personalized intro. Wait until you hear Adams. It's just him talking on the radio. Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Adam. The Rays dropping one again yesterday to the Baltimore Orioles, having a rough little stretch since the loss against the Yankees on Sunday. More injuries are piling up. I know Griffin Jax was cleared. He is going to be okay, but Taylor Walls is possibly going to go on the IL. What can you talk about Taylor Walls going down yesterday?
That seemed like it was more precautionary, something he's been playing through for a little while, kind of that tight hamstring. And it's funny, you go back to like plans you make in spring training, you talk about the fact that, they need to be careful with Taylor Walls' workload. They don't want him to play too much because, he can get beat up physically. And, just the fact of him being on the field is so important. And then I look back and it's like, well, he started 16 straight games at shortstop and he's played 39 of the last 42. It's like, I don't think that was exactly part of the plan. So stuff like, a tight hamstring pops up, and rather than risk him getting hurt in a game and then potentially being off the field, and then, they're already down Ben Williamson. So I think they're playing it pretty careful at this point. Just gave him a day off. We'll see when we get to the clubhouse later whether he's an option today. The off day tomorrow certainly helps, heading back to the drop on Friday.
Any news on Ben Williamson? Any update on him?
He could be back soon, actually. That was the word as of a couple of days ago. Back strains are kind of tricky. Obviously, just some days you wake up and it's sore again and you don't necessarily expect it. And, just kind of have to wait it out a little bit. But I think the hope was that he would be back when eligible, which I believe is Friday. So that would certainly go a long way toward resolving a number of injury situations, I think, because one, yes, he is the backup shortstop, so you can be a little bit more free with giving Taylor Walls time. You can bounce him over to second, and you have, either a starting option there or somebody who can split time with Richie Palacios, which would then free up Richie Palacios to maybe bounce out to right field on occasion where they are so beat up with Jake Fraley and Johnny DeLuca hurt. So there's kind of a lot riding actually on Ben Williamson getting back, and by all accounts, we'll check again today. Things are going well in that regard.
Good. Yeah. So I was really intrigued by the fact they put Dunn at short last night instead of Carson. With Carson sitting there, obviously he was the starting shortstop to begin the year when Walls was on the IL. I get the sense that, not that the team, certainly there's a lot of time for Carson to figure things out. I get the sense in the short term, they are really trying not to hide Carson, but to really limit his exposure or his time at this moment. Simply, unless they were just really wanting him to not face a right-handed pitcher. I was just a little surprised that they went with Dunn, who isn't a natural shortstop, when they had Carson available. Do you get the sense that, with Williamson coming back, Carson's probably likely going to be going back down to AAA, and just the team's just kind of trying to pick their spots very carefully? I mean, he hasn't impressed during his return. He's had a few mental mistakes on the base path, some throwing miscues.
Mhm.
I don't know. What's your sense with how the team is treating Carson right now, considering his standing as a prospect, as recently as this spring?
Right. It's still a lot of development, actually. It's kind of funny that watching everything unfold pregame, it was funny. You could see like Taylor Wall stretching his hamstring and kind of thinking through like, all right, if that's an issue, how are they going to handle this? Carson Williams is going through like a really pretty involved defensive workout pregame. So like there's still development happening for Carson
Mhm.
Williams. I think like everybody in the team is pretty cognizant of that. And especially in the fact that he's now kind of being shifted into a little bit of this sort of like more utility type role where he's not necessarily. That was the big thing with him coming up as a prospect, right? Like he played shortstop. He only played shortstop, and it said a lot about what the Rays thought of him that he only did that because they move everyone around. So there's still some development going on there. My guess is that he's the odd man out when Ben Williamson does come back. It's a little bit redundant as a righty who's going to play shortstop, second base, third base. That's what Ben Williamson does. Oliver Dunn, I did get the sense that, yes, it was just they wanted the lefty against Shane Baz, and especially Shane Baz being such a swing and miss guy, especially last night that he pitched. Carson Williams has plenty of swing and miss tendencies. One of the ways that they have been able to keep the lineup moving, obviously hasn't worked out the last couple of days, is not striking out, putting the ball in play, working tough at bats, moving along. Carson Williams doesn't necessarily do that. So I think it's just still kind of a case of him developing and, getting better as a big leaguer, not necessarily just a prospect. And that's all kind of come together here recently.
Yeah. And then because of the injuries that we've talked about, the Rays have brought in, Craig Kimbrell, who looked good yesterday in the 8th. And then and I don't know how much information you have on this, because I feel like it kind of just got thrown in, at least on what I saw online last night. But I saw the Rays signed Austin Slater,
Yep.
a minor league deal. But obviously he's MLB player, several years of experience, been very effective against lefties as a right-handed hitter. Have you heard anything about expectation of him, maybe getting a little bit of time in Durham and then expected to come up? Obviously they have a lot of depth being tested in the outfield. Mesa Juniors look good so far, but obviously they might not want him up here ideally at this point. So any idea on if Austin Slater could make make a run to Tampa here in the near future?
I actually checked on this last night. They agreed to terms on a minor league deal, still need to finalize the contract. The plan, assuming everything is finalized, is to send him to Durham to start. They still have a couple of things that they want to work on with him. But yeah, I think with the fact that Fraley was going to be out, 6 to 8 weeks after the hernia surgery, DeLuca is probably looking at 6 to 8 weeks. Like, it's a long time that you got to get through in right field. And you have options in Ryan Vlade and Ricky Palacios, but those guys are kind of needed elsewhere. So you could kind of maybe squint and see them trying to recreate a little bit of the Fraley DeLuca platoon, maybe with a Mesa and a Slater when he's ready and when they deem him ready. Those guys do, like you said, kind of interesting things. Like Slater can hit lefties. Mesa has looked pretty good, I thought, as at bats. He's certainly fast, and he does kind of some of the stuff that they like offensively, putting the ball in play and playing good defense. So I think if it does get to the point that they deem Slater ready, they're still without Fraley and DeLuca, maybe you could see kind of a Slater, Mesa, Vlade, Palacios kind of throw bodies.
Just like we all thought. Just like we all anticipated.
Yeah. Just how we drew it up in Port Charlotte. Yeah.
Adam, I want to get into, I know you're talking about development, especially with Carson Williams. I want to go to Junior Caminero. It seems that the developmental bug is still in progress with him. He started off the year injury prone a little bit, kind of got a little bit better with fundamentals, and now recently it's kind of, little miscues on the base pass and running. And now yesterday, how's the team treating with him? I know he's a big proponent about getting better, and he's really hard himself. Have you talked to him about it? What's Kevin Cash's approach to Junior going forward with all the kind of the miscues?
You just keep working with him. I think it stood out the day after it was in Toronto. He had a couple of tough plays. That was the game where he got in front of Taylor Walls and a couple and made some errors where he should have just stayed back and not played on the ball. They had no pregame work that day. Junior was the only one out there working with Brady Williams. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of talk, I should say, emphasizing that part of it, running him through scenarios, because he's still such a young player. He's still so eager to make plays. He's still so, just like I said, everything he does is loud. He's just trying to make plays. He's trying to get out there and, make an impact, do something, fire up the team, the way that he kind of enjoys doing offensively, certainly. So there's still a lot of work going on, I think, pregame and then in the conversations that they're having with him. And that's sort of the way that I've seen it go for him. The weird thing to me about the defense with Junior is that like he started off not great last season. We remember very well he was getting replaced by Jose Caballero at third base to finish those games the first couple months of the season. And then he really did work his way into being like a pretty solid defensive third baseman. I know our guy Mike Petriello, did like a StatCast analysis saying that like the swing for him to become like a really below average third baseman defensively to start last season to kind of above average by the time the season was over. It was really dramatic and wound up being net neutral in the end. But like that to me spoke of development, like this was happening. And I guess it's a reminder that development is not linear, as they often tell us, that sometimes you do step back. And, I wonder how much the WBC may have impacted it. He wasn't necessarily getting regular third base reps throughout spring training. He wasn't around the Rays coaches, obviously, for that extended time during camp. So I wonder how much of that's been an impact. And then how much is just kind of in his head thinking, all right, well, I've got to make this play. And then you put pressure on yourself and it's not natural, things like that. So I'm curious to see how that goes just based on what he did last year and knowing that there is still so much time for him to kind of take strides in that direction.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I mean, there's so much talk with him being like the next superstar in Tampa. Could it be affecting him mentally wise when it comes to like maybe, and I've said this on our show a couple of times where he could be hot dogging it and doing way too much, but if this continues throughout the season, I mean, a lot of people are screaming on X, oh, maybe you should move him to first or you should move him here. It's like, look, he's 22. The leash on him is pretty long. There's not going to be any kind of move to first base. And where would you have a run to play anyways, Sue? But
right,
I'm hoping like it's not affecting him where it's like I have to be the superstar third baseman and I have to do too much.
Yeah, I haven't seen that with him. And I think that if it was something that was going over to affect his offense, then you could probably worry about that like, he's carrying his glove to the plate with him. But, he's maybe not having like the highlight reel offensive game every night. But it does feel like I look at Baseball Savant every day and it's like, well, the hardest base hit last night was once again by Junior Caminero. Like he's still doing the things that you want to see offensively. So it leads me to believe that this is something that he can work through. He is a guy who does get after it work-wise. So I would expect that that's going to happen. And then, position changes, I think that's probably a future conversation. Bound to happen at some point, most likely. Just he is a big-bodied guy and, his bat can play anywhere in the lineup positionally. But I think they're pretty committed to him at third base. And knowing that they have a Ben Williamson, whoever else who could finish games at third base if necessary, you just hate doing that because, as you've been reminded in these last couple of extra inning games, like you make that move, it's not reversible. He's out of the lineup. Right. If you put extras and you'd much rather have him in the lineup than some of the alternatives.
Trust me, if you're not on X or Twitter, don't go on X or Twitter. It's a bunch of madness and people that don't know what they're talking about.
I'm not, and I always get the updates from Evan and it.
Yeah, I tell him don't. If you have an account, don't make one. Like it's just it's pandemonium right now, and it's just a bunch of I know this and you're stupid. It's like don't go.
You'll see and read things about the Royals potentially trading Bobby Witt Jr., which you're like, well, this is the best thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's kind of, there was one that was like, and I think it made its way even to maybe radio. It was like, Yordan Alvarez getting traded. I was like, he's a pretty good player.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of trade scenarios, that is a scenario that's come up with the Rays. I mean, if they keep playing like this, I know Neander said, hey, if we're at this point, we're playing like this at the deadline, we'll be pretty aggressive. How aggressive are they going to likely be if they continue to play like they are heading into the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen them, like it's pretty well established at this point. If they are in like position to win the division, they will be aggressive. I mean, the Nelson Cruz trade, like at the time, that was, look at this. Like they made the big move. Obviously, it didn't work out in hindsight. That is the risk when you make these moves. I know it came out a couple of days ago, the one that we'd heard about, for a couple of years now, that like they made a pretty aggressive pursuit for Shohei Ohtani at the trade deadline in 2023. Like that is the biggest possible fish that you can go looking for. So that is something that I think that they've shown a willingness to do in the past. Like, listen, if they are in position to win the division, get that first round bye through the wild card series, that just improves your chances to get to a World Series and therefore win a World Series exponentially. So you want to do what you can to supplement the roster. They have a deep farm system. It's not necessarily a star-studded farm system, but like you have a lot of opportunity to make moves when you have that kind of depth that they have in the system. So I would expect them to, basically look where they are in the standings, and that's how aggressive they will be. Position to win a wild card, spot. They're going to make moves like they've done in the past. If they're on the outside looking in, they're probably going to do a little buying and selling like they've done in the past as well. So I'm curious to see what that means come trade deadline time, just because the league is so tightly packed together. Like, I would kind of like to see who are the buyers, who are the sellers. What is that going to mean for a team like the Rays? And, how does that kind of shape the trade landscape as a whole, the next 2 months?
Yeah.
Since the injuries are piling up, do you think they'd make an early move and make a trade, since we've got so many injuries that are coming about?
Maybe you saw him do it with Brian Baker last year, and about what was that? Probably a couple of weeks from now, a year ago, right? Early June, I want to
say. It was
early July. It was right before
because he came up. His first game was in Fenway when they were on that awful road trip before the break.
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, you'll see them make that. That was more time based on the fact that the draft pick was being dealt. So you have to make that trade before the draft rather than before the deadline. But I mean, we've seen them be aggressive with stuff like, what was it, Bob Stevenson a couple years ago, where, they had a clear need in the bullpen. Even when they went out and they signed Jake Diekman, this Craig Kimbrell signing feels like kind of like the Jake Diekman signing from a few years ago.
A little bit.
Let's take this guy. Yeah. And let's see if we can fix him up and get him in the bullpen and, kind of provide a good veteran presence, and we'll see if it works or not. But you can see where there is still kind of an ongoing, even, signing Slater, signing Kimbrell, they're clearly still in roster upgrade mode with these injuries going on. It's just whether or not, like I said, the appetite is there to make trades from other teams in the league. And if they're going to have the prices in a reasonable point, given how far away we are from the deadline, the Patrick Bailey trade struck me as so odd, given how early it happened in the season. That stuff just doesn't necessarily happen, but maybe those conversations are happening and it's just not going to lead to action anytime soon.
Yeah. You mentioned the Nelson Cruz trade. A lot of people,
it's 2 years too late,
rail on the Rays for making that trade. I think it was actually a great move. Of course, we all remember, though, that Jordan Luplow was the real prize of that deadline season, considering the impact he had in Game 2. So
yes, grand slam.
Yes. So when Jordan Luplow has a bigger impact on the playoff run than Nelson Cruz, maybe something didn't go right, but you can't fault him for trying, at least.
Right.
I'm curious, what they could do so many things, but do you get the sense, and I know it's still early because there is so much to still happen with the standings, and I think even teams like the Red Sox are still technically only a few games out of a playoff spot, even though they're off to a terrible start. So many teams could do so many different things, but do you get the sense of, okay, if the Rays are going to make trades, it feels like, to me, it feels like they're going to need an outfielder, and I'd say bullpen. I could see them going more of a starting pitcher, only because of wanting to reduce innings, reduce workloads for guys. You got to manage those workloads for McClanahan and Rasmussen, and even the older guys that you don't want to ride them all season long, and then they don't have anything left at the end. So, do you get the sense of positionally where you think they would be most aggressive to make a move? Looking ahead on the road.
Yeah, I would think a lot of it's going to depend on injuries and who's healthy. I wouldn't have necessarily said they needed a right fielder until a couple weeks ago, and then all of a sudden it's well, maybe that's a spot where they can add. You want to see where Cedric Mullins is at. Obviously, he's trended a little bit back in a better direction this month, but is there room to add a center fielder who has maybe a little bit more pop in the bat that could could still play the position? That would certainly be an interesting area where they could add. But I think pitching as a whole is probably kind of like you said, whether that's bullpen help, because that's where the more obvious need is. There are more spots that you can fill out there right now, and having that kind of lockdown situation in the late innings, that also depends, I think, on where is Edwin Uceta at the trade deadline. Is he back? Is he good? Is he healthy? Is Manny Rodriguez back? Is he a guy you can count on back there? Because then all of a sudden you're in a scenario in 2 months where the bullpen actually has more options that you know what to do with, and maybe you want to focus some of that attention on the rotation for the reasons that you said, Griffin Jacks, where his innings going to be at, not just in September, but now if you're starting to plan for October, Shane McClanahan, same thing, Drew Rasmussen. Nick Martinez is probably the only one that you feel really solid about as far as he can just carry the workload that he has moving forward. Steven Matz, same thing. You got to be careful with him. But one thing that the Rays do fairly well, and I think it speaks to the depth that they have and the way that they kind of build up options at every position, basically, is they can pursue just impact wherever it is. Who is the best player available? Who is the player who's going to have the biggest impact on their team, regardless of position, and then kind of move around all the other pieces to make it work. So I think it would kind of depend on who's out there, who's available, and then where they can kind of squeeze that player in. Because the one thing you can say pretty safely is not third base, not first base, not DH. They're pretty safe there. And then everything else, make it work.
Okay, so shifting back to the current team and just what we've seen thus far this season, I would argue that they had, I know Shane wasn't on the roster in 25 or 24, so you could argue maybe pitching talent was a little bit better this year than maybe what they had the last couple of years. But I would argue as a roster, as a full roster, they've probably had better talent overall. But obviously the results were not good the last 2 years. And then this year they've gotten off to such a great start combined with the lackluster start of pretty much everyone else in the American League, which is really just, I mean, it's about as good as you could have hoped for as a Rays fan. What is it? The players talk a ton about the clubhouse chemistry, and it's great. Like you hear that's all you want to hear as a fan. I'm sure as someone who's in the clubhouse like yourself, like how have you taken all of that in this year, and what do you really see as the biggest difference between like this season's roster, this season's team, and maybe what we've seen the last few years when maybe that talent level was higher, but obviously they just hovered around 500 or were just kind of average at best on the field.
Right. Yeah, pitching talent is a big part of it. Like, I'm glad you brought that up. Like, the fact that they are in basically every game because of their starting pitching does go a long way toward explaining this. That wasn't always the case the last couple of years. You'd see, some Taj Bradley starts or even some Shane Baz starts where they were just out of it immediately. And like, that's hard to overcome as a team that's not necessarily built on slugging and whatnot. So that's part of it. But from the clubhouse chemistry point, like, I am generally, I've said this before, like kind of a skeptic on those stories. Like, some people, they're just going to write them every year, regardless of whether or not it's like, these guys get along great in spring training. It's like, everybody does. It's spring training. Everyone's having a wonderful time. This team, though, like, it was pretty obviously different from the beginning. And I thought it kind of stood out. Nick Martinez is a huge part of it. Like, I'd heard good things about him when he came in. You kind of think, all right, like, I've dealt with a lot of good players in my career, a lot of good clubhouse guys as well. But like, he is like a legitimate difference maker in the clubhouse to me. Just the tone that he sets, the way that he connects with everybody, just kind of the vibe that he sets for the group and the way that people just want to be around him is really impactful. Like, I didn't necessarily know that coming into it. I've been really impressed by him. Wrote something about that back in spring training, just kind of about how he learned how to handle a clubhouse from coming up with the Rangers in the mid 2010s and the guys that he was around and how to lead. You combine that with Steven Matz, who's been kind of a little bit more quiet, but like a really good presence to be around these guys. Having McClanahan back and healthy and part of the active roster, like, I don't know if people necessarily appreciate what like a good teammate Shane is. Like, guys like being around him. He connects with position players and pitchers alike. He's a really good guy to be around. He's fun. He brings kind of an attitude to the ballpark every day. Combine that with the Cedric Mullins, the Jake Fraley's, just veteran presences who've come in and like had a really immediate impact just dealing with the guys. And I think that's part of it. Guys like being around each other. That was evident from beginning in spring training, and then we show up in St. Louis and they're talking about how, I'm sure you guys have heard the story that like a couple of guys were going to go hang out and have dinner, and then it's like 20 people wind up in the lobby and they're going to have dinner as a group of 20. Like, that doesn't happen on a big league team. You have just cliques by nature. Like, even teams that get along really well, like, you just have certain groups that you hang out with, and this team does seem more unified in that way. And what sets it apart, sorry, I'm rambling here, but
no, you're right.
the way that kind of impacts like the actual thing on the field is that like, this is a really selfless group that's kind of been asked to play a selfless kind of game. It is small ball, it's platooning, it's, laying down your at bat or whatever, or giving up your at bat to another guy on the roster. And, whereas a lot of teams, you might have egos where that kind of impacts and it carries over and maybe it leads out to something different on the field. This group seems pretty on board with everything. Like, whether it's Junior being taken out for defense, whether it's, Richie Palacios and Ben Williamson platooning, or Jake Fraley and Johnny DeLuca platooning. Like, Johnny DeLuca probably has an argument as an everyday player, but he's been very happy when he was healthy, very happy and confident and comfortable in the role that he was being asked to play, probably realizing that he's being set up for success with the role that he is playing. He's being put in favorable matchups and advantageous situations and everything like that. And combine that with, I think, the way that Kevin Cash has managed this group, especially on the position player side, really well this season. And it leads to some of the success that you've had, despite, like you said, maybe not having the talent. Maybe a lot of people from the outside looking at this group and saying, who are some of these guys? Like, it's just all kind of been a really good mix of chemistry and management. I think that's allowed them to get the most out of the skill sets they have.
That's been pretty much
Sorry.
everybody, and it's been pretty much everybody in the national media is like, who are these guys? They're just a bunch of nobody, and
sure,
that's pretty
they
much
say that
every single
every
year with the
year.
Rays.
Yeah, every year.
But I'm,
Right, and
I'm
like-
glad that you brought up Nick Martinez because we had him on the show a few episodes ago, and that's one of the questions we asked was like, coming into a new thing, brand new relationship with these guys. How did you guys like? He's like, look, we go on fishing trips together.
Yeah.
We play ping pong, we go golfing. It's like, having that is definitely definitely reflects on the field because it looks like they're having more fun than they were the past couple of years.
Yeah, and I think, and again, how much of that is like, well, they're winning, so they're having more fun. But like, again,
Right.
this comes back to like that first road trip wasn't good, and they were still
Right.
talking about this stuff. Like that to me is where it stands out that like, all right, this isn't like a media thing or like a manufactured guys say this because this is what they're supposed to say situation. Like when you can see it, even when times are bad, and even when it's the start of the season or whatever, like it felt very real, and I'm glad you got to talk to Nick about that because he's such a big part of it to me just from viewing it, the access and the time that we do have in the clubhouse.
What how much of a difference does being back at the Trop make? I think before we talked before the season, Evan and I were talking about I think it puts them in it definitely puts them in more of a position to be successful because they're in a lot of ways built for the Trop, right, with the pitching and defense angle.
Right.
And that's such a great place to pitch. But I mean, do you think, just being back at least in Tropicana Field and having that kind of sense of security there instead of, do you think that's just had a real tangible effect too on, obviously the home record is incredible, unsustainable, you would think, but I think whether they like 19-5 or something like that. Or something ridiculous.
Exactly. 19-5. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it has to be a part of it. Like
Yeah.
you said, not just from a comfort perspective of like, all right, this is home. Like everybody's had the very good line about like, I've stayed in very nice hotels before, but like I still prefer sleeping in my own bed. Like that's kind of the way it's felt at being at the Trop is like, yeah, there were some really nice things about Steinbrenner being outside. The home clubhouse was amazing, but like the Trop is the Trop. It's home for these guys and it's where they're used to being. And more from a practical on-field perspective, yeah, it's a great place to pitch. Like you hear that from players who used to play for the Rays and then went elsewhere, or like guys who come to the Rays for the first time. Like the mound is good, the sight lines are good. You know that it's going to be no atmospheric effects. Like you don't have to worry about wind or humidity or whatever affecting your grip or the pitch movement or whatever. And like the way that the Rays build their staffs so much, I think it's, you want to have everything kind of line up on the mound like it looks in the bullpen or like it looks in the lab, and that's very much possible at the Trop. From a pitching perspective, that's super helpful. And yeah, like it is built more for like athletic defenders and athletic base runners. Chandler Simpson is able to do his thing on the on the turf and in the dirt at the Trop, not having to worry about rain or whatever, a field being muddied up. And it lets kind of their outfield, which has been tremendous defensively this season, kind of roam around. And I think that definitely goes a long way as well. And it's harder for opposing sluggers to, sneak out the Aaron Judge home run that he hit the other day at Yankee Stadium. That's less likely to happen at the Trop than it is at Yankee Stadium. A lot more likely to happen at Steinbrenner.
That's not a wall over there. That's a fence. That's a fence.
Right.
It's not a wall.
Right. So yeah, I think it's in both the kind of the soft factors and like the actual tangible stuff. It's been huge. And like you said, a lot brighter.
Yeah, I think also it helps too. Like the attendance is up. Like the Trop's getting really rowdy now with the tarps off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it helps out a lot. Going back to the Trop and being at home. Adam, I want to talk. What news broke yesterday? It's that for he should not be named. Wander Franco found guilty. No prison sentence. There's going to be another sentencing in July, I think it is for his trial.
June, yeah.
A lot of people are asking about the contract and how if are the Rays going to get stuck with that, or is the MLB going to be able to avoid it? What's your take on that? What's the news on that so far?
Yeah, so that was the ruling, is that he was criminally responsible. This was a retrial of the first one where he was found guilty and got the suspended 2-year sentence. So he wasn't in prison before. Now he's not getting a prison sentence regardless, because the judge found that he was a material victim despite being criminally responsible. Apparently the extortion thing kind of seemed to carry a lot of weight in the ruling. Again, I wasn't in the courthouse, so I'm mostly following this from afar as well. And trying to understand the Dominican legal system, which I did not go to college for, despite my fine education at the University of Florida. There's going to be a full sentencing on June 16th. But in the meantime, it's kind of status quo, which is where it's been for the last 3 years now. Is or as that is the belief, since this all began. But formally charged, he's on the restricted list because he can't report. And my understanding at this point is that as long as he can't report because he can't get a work visa, then this is where he'll stay. That's
would the MLBA try and fight that and try to get him paid, or since the guilty verdict has been put down, it's like it's done. Like we're not. It's like MLB will just be like, what are we doing here? Like that contract is voided.
I honestly don't know. I don't
know.
Like, there's not a lot of precedent here. Like, I know that, he's also still like under investigation by MLB. So that process would have to play out as well. There's, a lot going on. And I think the fact that he's on the restricted list, like there are processes in place to handle this and why he's not getting paid or accruing service time while he's on the restricted list for, like I said, failure to report to the team, which you can't do because he can't get a work visa. So it would all have to start there, I think, for any of that to come into play.
Gotcha. Okay.
Do you think that just kind of a quick follow-up on Wander, just from your perspective of being in the clubhouse for the last several years, the lingering effects of that, because it kind of got swept, like no one was talking about it, nothing. But I mean, we saw obviously they had a ton of injuries in 23 on top of the Wander stuff, and then we just talked about they had good talent in 24 and even in 25, but it was obvious the team had built itself to revolve around Wander for good reason. And with him being gone in the manner in which it happened, do you think that the lingering effects of that, it just was something that the team we were seeing play out in real time in terms of just the impact that all that was having on, just not only the roster construction, but the clubhouse. And, maybe now we're finally emerging out from that shadow of the controversy and moving forward with kind of a newly built, new look team, post Wander?
It's hard to say because, like, to be honest, like he didn't come up a lot in the clubhouse, period.
Yeah.
Like, his baseball players are very good at kind of focusing on what's in front of them, and that includes like who's on the team and who's not on the team. So he really did not come up a lot in the clubhouse, certainly not the last couple of years, but even down the stretch in 23, frankly, when I was around, like it wasn't a thing that people were talking about on a daily basis. It wasn't like a regular topic of conversation. From a roster building perspective, you can certainly ask that question because, like you said, like when he signed that long-term contract and he was going to be the face of the franchise for the foreseeable future moving forward. And obviously that was going to be who the team was built around. They were very fortunate in that they got another potential face of the franchise in a trade who came up in Junior Caminero, who was kind of able to be that, sort of load-bearing, piece of the lineup and everything like that. So, and they got a Jose Caballero who's able to play shortstop, and they were able to kind of backfill in the ways that they do. But yeah, I mean, it is like a kind of an all-time what-if situation, and one that we don't really have the answers to, unfortunately.
Drew, we could always trade for Bobby Wood Jr. and bring him over. Just saying.
I'm
just saying.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
Probably the most absurd thing I've heard in a long time.
It was brought up on Twitter. Like I said,
but here's the thing,
place, man.
2023, somebody says the Rays are going to trade for Shohei Ohtani. You're like, that's fake. That can't be a real thing.
Talk about a what if. That would have been an all-time like blow up in their face moment,
right?
Because not only would they have traded Shohei, they would have lost Shane a few weeks later, Wander stuff, and then Shohei blows out his UCL.
Right. So he wouldn't have been able to pitch. Yeah.
Oh man, it would have just been
the what ifs and the trajectory of what they'd be right now if that would have happened.
Nothing like that.
And like, there's so many of those trades too that like we don't hear about, that it's like, they could have had this guy before he blew up, and like you don't know, and what would it have cost him. Like there's so many of those what ifs, and that's why they're fascinating to talk about. And then it's like, maybe there's a reason this didn't happen.
I heard a rumor supposedly from somebody that worked with the Rays several years ago that they had a trade for Chris Bryant, but I believe it was when he got traded. It was when he got traded to the Giants from the Cubs. They had a trade for Bryant, but it was I can never remember his name. Oh, Kevin Padlow, the third baseman. He was a part of the deal, and he failed his physical, and it fell through. And that was what I had heard.
There was a lot of that big game hunting around that, like 21. We were really even going back to 20. Like Max Scherzer's name was thrown around at some point. We all remember the Freddie Freeman pursuit, which was like very real. Like I think still to a certain extent, people didn't take that seriously. And it's like, no, like that was a real thing. Like they were optimistic and had hope that they would be able to sign him. And again, talk about sliding doors. Like what would have happened in that scenario? It's crazy to think about. But again, like they are willing to go big game hunting if the situation is right. So that makes me very curious to see if they do keep this up, and are in a position to win the division come trade deadline. Like,
Yep.
who's next? Bobby Witt. There you go.
I'm telling you, crazier things could happen in the world of Major League Baseball.
Well, I told Evan,
or we could bring over Mike Trout. You never know. I mean, if he waives his no trade clause, boom, Mike Trout.
I told Evan, I said, listen, if they trade Bobby Witt, where's he going to play? Because I mean, it's not like they're going to move Taylor. Come on, if there's one team moving, no, Taylor Walls isn't moving off shortstop no matter who.
Put Bobby Witt second base. Put him over in second.
Yeah. They'll platoon him with Palacios at second.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
This is great. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, Adam, thanks for coming. We'll get you out of here. Adam, thanks for coming on the show. I know you got to head down to Camden in a few, so we'll get you out of here. Thanks for coming on the show. And thanks for everybody for tuning in for another episode of the Rays Rewind podcast, the sickest Tampa Bay Rays podcast on the Sick Podcast Network. I can't talk today. Make sure to go to our YouTube page at the Sick Podcast, Rays Rewind, hit the subscribe and notification bell. For myself, Drew, and Adam, we'll see you guys next time on the Rays Rewind podcast. See you.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Rays Rewind with El Bushman and Drew on YouTube, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.